Hi, my name is Francis Sue. I am a professor of mathematics at Harvey Mudd College. It's a small science and engineering school in Southern California. Thank you for coming to my book talk presentation. I'm excited to tell you about my book. It's a book that it's about mathematics and it's for the general public, but it's a bit different than other books on math because most books about math talk about how great math is, or maybe another model is to talk about all the wonderful things that math can do. And my book is a little different because it starts with what does it mean to be a human being, and it grounds mathematics in what does it mean to live a more fully human life. So I'll have to unpack that a little bit. And one way to do that is this question I often get, what's your book about? What is your book about? One thing I like to say is that my book is about, it's an inclusive vision of what math is, who it's for, and why anybody should learn it. Because if math is really centered in what it means to be a human being, then everybody should gravitate to it, everybody should have access to it, and uh, and everybody should be able to enjoy it and pursue it and even demand it. And so I've tried to be inclusive in lots of different ways about lots of different ways in this book. I have tried to include voices of not just famous white mathematicians, but mathematicians who are both ancient and modern, people of color, math teachers and math educators, researchers in math education. These are often voices that are left out of books like these. My wife has another way of explaining what she finds compelling about the book. And another way to describe the book is that it's basically centered around the stories of three different people. An incarcerated man named Christopher Jackson, a French philosopher named Simone Vey, and me. And it describes our journeys in mathematics and our struggle to find a place in mathematical spaces that weren't really built for us. And so this book is my attempt at trying to give a voice to be an encouragement for countless others who have felt that in some ways disenchanted with their past math experiences. And a running quote throughout the book is this quote by Simone Vey, every being cries out silently to be read differently. So I'll tell you a little bit about Christopher Jackson. He is an inmate in a high-security federal prison who I've had a long correspondence with. He's been in trouble with the law since he was age 14, and he got in trouble involved with hard drugs. He was involved in a series of armed robberies, and he landed in prison as a teenager with a 32-year sentence. And so when you think about who does mathematics, would you think of Christopher? Probably not, and yet he wrote me a letter after 7 years in prison in which he said that being in a very early stage of youth and having lived in some adverse circumstances, I never came to understand the true meaning and benefit of pursuing an education. And so he described his multi-year journey to learn mathematics starting from basic algebra all the way up through calculus. And he was writing me for help in furthering his math education. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Simone Vey is a well-known French religious mystic and a widely revered philosopher. And she's probably less well-known as the younger sister of Andre Vey, who is one of history's most famous number theorists. And for Simone, to read someone means to judge them or interpret them, make a judgment about them. So she's saying every being cries out silently to be judged differently. And I sometimes wonder if she was crying out about herself because she too loved mathematics, participated in mathematics, but she was always comparing herself to her brother. And she writes this, at 14, I fell into one of those fits of bottomless despair that come with adolescence, and I seriously thought of dying because of the mediocrity of my natural faculties. The exceptional gifts of my brother, who had a childhood and youth comparable to those of Pascal, brought my own inferiority home to me. I didn't mind having no visible successes, but what did grieve me was the idea of being excluded from that transcendent kingdom to which only the truly great have access and wherein truth abides. I prefer to die rather than live without that truth. Now, we know that she loved mathematics because you will find her in pictures like these with her older brother and other mathematicians. This is a group called Bourbaki. This is a famous group of French reformist mathematicians. Simone also used lots of mathematical examples throughout her philosophical writing. And it's interesting to look at this picture and wonder what her relationship to mathematics would be like if she weren't always in her brother's shadow. She's sitting at the left, poring over some notes, the lone woman in this picture, and Andre is the one who's waving the bell. The third story that I tell is that of my own story. I'm a math professor, as I mentioned, also former president of the Mathematical Association of America. And so you might think my relationship to math must have always been solid. But I grew up in a small town in South Texas with limited opportunities. Yes, that's me with hair. And the town had limited opportunities. Most of my high school peers didn't attend college, and so college wasn't a standard thing that kids did. I was fortunate to have supportive teachers and parents, and I managed to get admitted to Harvard for my PhD, but I felt quite out of place there because I didn't have the same background as my peers, and I didn't come from an Ivy League school. And so I even faced some active discouragement and some unkind professors who didn't believe that I would succeed in mathematics. And so I felt like Simone Vey, standing next to future Andre Veys, thinking I would never be able to flourish if I weren't like them. And so my book brings together, it's not primarily about these three stories, but it weaves together these three stories and many others to ask the question, which I think is an important question for all of us if we think about math education in general, is what's the purpose of learning mathematics? Why do mathematics? If you think about this, why is Christopher sitting in a prison cell studying calculus that he'll likely never use, or at least not use for another 20 years? Why? Why is Simone so desperately interested, so captivated by transcendent mathematical truths? Why should anybody persist in doing math when others are telling them that in subtle ways, and maybe not so subtle ways, that they don't belong? And that happens to far too many kids these days. Another question you might ask is math only a tool to make you college and career ready? Because that's the standard line that kids are often given for why they're learning math. Or, this is a view more prevalent among college faculty, is math unnecessary for most of us and only for the elite few, right? This is the view that maybe we train up math majors to produce future PhDs, and that's it. Is that Is that the way we should be thinking about math? Why study math if you'll never use what you're learning, right? Many of the most exciting things that are going on these days in technology involve mathematics that didn't exist 25 years ago when the inventors were learning math, right? So why do we learn math? And so if you ask me why learn mathematics, I would give this answer. It's because mathematics helps people flourish. The mathematics is for human flourishing. And when I say human flourishing, I'm thinking about this idea of a certain wholeness of being, a wholeness of being and doing, of realizing one's potential and helping others to do the same, of acting with honor and treating others with dignity, and of living with integrity even in challenging circumstances. So human flourishing isn't just something that happens when you're happy. It's not just a frame of mind. And philosophers have often talked about this idea of human flourishing, and one way to think about this is it's the well-lived life. And when we think about human flourishing, Aristotle argued that flourishing comes about through the exercise of virtue. And so part of the claim that I'm making is that doing math properly builds certain virtues that serve you well no matter what you do in life, no matter what profession you go into. One way to think about virtue is excellence of character that leads to excellence of conduct. And so it includes more than just moral virtue. If you think about many kinds of virtue, patience, wisdom, mathematics, I would say, builds certain kinds of virtues as well. Persistence, curiosity, clear thinking. And these are all virtues that math builds, and these serve you well no matter what you do in life or where you go. And so my book is really centered around basic human desires, 12 basic human desires that I argue that every human being shares. So that's the sense in which this book begins with what it means to be a human being. You're naturally an explorer, right? You naturally search for meaning. You seek beauty. You seek out truth. You desire permanence. You long for justice and freedom, right? These are all deep human desires. And so I thought what I'd do today, since it's a very short time, is I've just selected and adapted passages from 3 chapters of the book, just to give you a taste of what I'm talking about. Exploration is the first theme, basic human desire. Now, when I think of exploration, I think of my own experience as a little child growing up in South Texas, where I could actually see stars, and I loved looking at the night sky, and I loved devouring books about astronomy and dreaming about space, and my imagination was further stoked by pictures like these in the newspapers. Right? These are pictures of the rings of Saturn, and I remember being amazed and fascinated that we could actually learn something about these worlds and even their mathematical patterns from 900 million miles away. This blew my mind. And mathematical exploration is actually very much like space exploration. That's maybe not the way you experienced it when you were in school, but it ought to be. It's a different kind of space. It's a space of ideas, right? You don't know what you'll find when you start. You send out probes to test theories. You're captivated by mystery. You're motivated by questions. You're undeterred by setbacks when you're an explorer, right? What would it look like for us to think about mathematics this way? You make discoveries from a distance because the ideas themselves are not physical. You access this space through reason. And exploration is at the heart of what it means to do mathematics. Those of us who do mathematics professionally see this, right? This is the part that attracted us to mathematics. You don't need a lot of resources to be a mathematical explorer, right? And as a result, you can embark on an adventure from anywhere, right? A prison, a small rural town, or a far-flung corner of the earth. And exploration cultivates in us virtues like imagination and creativity. In order to solve problems, you have to dream up new possibilities. And math lovers love to dream up new ways of visualizing patterns, and we begin to envision the hidden structures that underlie everything that we see. That's what makes new inventions possible. And one of my favorite virtues that exploration cultivates is the expectation of enchantment. Right? Explorers are excited about the thrill of finding the unexpected, especially things weird and wonderful. Right? It's why hikes through unfamiliar terrain entice us. Right? It's why unexplored caves beckon to us. It's why the strange creatures of the deep sea ocean floor fascinate us, right? What else might be lurking down there? And in math, it's the same way. When you take a Fractal Menger sponge that looks like this with square-shaped holes all over, and you slice it diagonally, and you find a bunch of hexagonal stars, you're amazed, you're enchanted, right? You're surprised. This is what doing mathematics is like, right? We learn to expect enchantment around every corner, which makes math exciting to learn. So we keep coming back for more. And so imagine what it would be like if, as we learned math, or as we taught math, as some of us are teachers, if we opened ourselves up to enchantment, or if we trained our kids or our students to expect enchantment when they do mathematics. How can we design curricula that think about things like these? Because if you think math is just about memorizing things and not understanding things, then of course you're going to think it's dull and boring, right? But if you learn math or you're taught math with the expectation of enchantment, you'll think it's hidden treasure. Another chapter is a chapter on beauty. By the way, some of the nice artwork in the book was done by my friend Carl Olson. Beauty is a basic human desire. All of us are naturally attracted to beauty, and it's a natural entryway for many to find their way into mathematics. There's lots of different kinds of mathematical beauty, and I spend some time in this book trying to unpack what mathematical beauty feels like. And I would say that there are 4 types of mathematical beauty, right? One type of mathematical beauties is this kind of beauty, where you just look at a beautiful pattern and take it in, right? This is what I call sensory mathematical beauty. But there's also more sublime kinds of mathematical beauty, right? There's also wondrous beauty. That's the beauty of a wonderful idea. Everybody should have an experience of wondrous beauty. There's also insightful beauty, the beauty of reasoning, when you understand or you reason and see why something is true, and you're amazed by the elegance of that idea. And maybe the most sublime kind of notion of beauty is the idea of transcendent mathematical beauty. This is like the beauty of seeing the big picture, when everything comes together and you see, there's a connection between this idea and this idea and this idea. You see the same thing everywhere. And so what does beauty do for us? Well, pursuing beauty of any kind, but even mathematical beauty, cultivates in us the virtue of reflection. When you contemplate beautiful ideas, just like you contemplate a beautiful forest. It leads to joyful gratitude and transcendent awe. And when we experience profound beauty from seeing a beautiful idea everywhere, we begin to build in ourselves an important virtue, habits of generalization. This is probably one of the most underrated virtues, but it is so powerful and so important, because when you have habits of generalization, you begin to see overarching patterns everywhere. And so, for instance, when I learn a new theorem or new idea, I often ask, what gives this idea its power? What's the underlying principle? How might it apply to a more general situation? And these habits carry over to other areas of my life, right? When I'm cooking a stir fry and I'm learning a new recipe, I think about, I don't want to memorize recipes, okay? It's the same way in math. I don't want to memorize algorithms that I don't understand. I want to know what the underlying idea is. And so with the recipe, I think, okay, what general principles does this recipe teach me, right? Add garlic and chopped onions first. Put in basil at the end or it'll lose its color, right? If I just remember the principles, then that allows me to improvise new dishes or new mathematical delights. Here's a third example from the book, from the chapter on justice. My favorite Chinese cuisine, my favorite Chinese restaurant serves authentic cuisine just like my parents used to make. And when you order an entree, they bring you a little appetizer and a dessert as well. And it's a bargain, so I don't complain that the appetizer, crunchy noodles, and dessert, which is Jell-O, are not themselves authentic. But one day, I went there with a Chinese-speaking friend. And when the appetizer came, it wasn't crunchies, but it was delectable pickled cucumbers. Yet my friend had made no special request. And when the dessert came, it was red bean soup, just like my mom used to make. And I began to wonder, how come I hadn't gotten this before? And I began to see a pattern. When I came with non-Asian friends, I would get the crunchies and the Jell-O. But when I came with Asian friends, I got the good stuff without even asking. And then I noticed that my Chinese friends were given a completely different menu, a secret menu with the more authentic dishes. I looked around the restaurant and I beheld a bizarre sight, people side by side in the same space having completely different experiences. Non-Asians ordering from the standard menu and getting Jell-O, and Asians ordering from the secret menu and enjoying red bean soup. And even when I found out about this menu and I'd ask for the menu, I was often told, no. You won't like the stuff on that menu. Because even though I'm of Chinese descent, the waiters had assumed, because I speak perfect English, that I must not be interested in authentic Chinese food. Now, why do I bring this example up? It's because mathematical spaces in the home and in the classroom can be like this restaurant, right? Whom do we show a peek at the secret mathematical menu? Whom do we shepherd towards math games or math toys, math courses? Whom do we assume is interested in math and whom do we assume is not? And so the whole chapter continues from this example and explores this question. But the upshot of the chapter is when we begin to see how our experiences are different from our neighbors, we begin to want the secret menu for everyone. That's the whole idea behind the chapter on justice. So there's a taste of what's in the book, and there's a lot more I could say, but there's a lot of themes in here. For instance, the struggle chapter talks about the importance of struggle. You know, mathematical explorers actually begin to relish struggle, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't see about math. And and so there's a lot in here, and maybe I'll just end by saying that there's the love chapter is probably the one you're like, what? What does that have to do with math? And maybe the theme here to think about is this. I'll just leave you with this idea that one way we love people is when we actually stop speaking about talent, mathematical talent, as a thing you either have or you don't, right? And start thinking about math, start speaking of the virtues that each person can build through the hope and the joy of effort, courageous effort, and hard work. This is one way that we love people, is to believe that everybody can flourish and can have meaningful experiences in mathematics. Thank you very much. There's probably only 1 minute for questions, but I'll also be signing books at the Yale booth, which is just down here. Yes. He'd heard about Harvey Mudd on a TV show that he watched, and then he had his mother look on the website and pick somebody to write. There are no courses given at the prison. Yeah. So the question was, how did how did Christopher Jackson first get in contact with me? By the way, Christopher is as you notice, a contributor on the book and also receiving a portion of the royalties. And he has contributed a number of his letters to the book. And so you begin over the course of the book, you see his growth and his progression. And one thing I'll say about Christopher is that this book is really not about me teaching Christopher mathematics. It's more about how Christopher has reshaped the way that I think about math to believe even more fully that math has something to offer everybody. I mean, because if you ask me, in theory, yeah, I believe math has something to offer everybody. But I'm probably just as surprised as anybody that a prison inmate is has spent several years working his way up from algebra to calculus, and even in the many years since then we've had this long correspondence, he's now studying advanced topology and analysis, and you think, gosh, what does math actually bring him? I mean, I know, because I feel like, yeah, math, I'm excited by math. There's something beautiful here. Again, thank you very much. I'll be at the Yale booth here if you're interested in chatting more or getting a book. Thank you.